and carried out there. When you say at the end of the hunger strike, I can point to Georgia and point to other states where people are still kicking up dust behind their treatment. So the power of ideas is greater than what just happened in Pelican Bay, because people are fighting back in a whole bunch of other spots that was inspired by the idea of a hunger strike. So if you narrow it down to just what happened in Pelican Bay, you could miss the tip of the spear and get hit by the back end of it. Some parts of the thing about the power of ideas, and I said I hadn't seen it since the 70s. How about they murdered George Jackson one week, in the following week they're probably in Attica having a rebellion. The powers of ideas. What you could be having is a moment that's more than just an ordinary blip on the scale of stuff. And if we miss it, then you really do miss it. I haven't seen this excitement level of people coming out of prison in 3 decades. They come out with ideas. I can, like Youssef Shakur is coming into California to do his books. We're meeting people who are writing their own stuff. So you look at Michelle Alexander and we say that's the passive part of the question. Because you haven't even begun to read our material, and you haven't even begun to recognize that we carry our own history.
Thanks. Okay, so we're going to go on to the because of lack of time only, right? And I know you guys have other things to do as well. So we're going to go on to the third question. I'm going to ask Molly to answer it first, and then after the third question discussed by the panelists, then we can open up the whole discussion, and your question will go first. All right, so the question is, can we abolish the prison system? And I'll preface this by saying that the first time I heard it, I thought it was rhetorical. And a lot of people have said, I completely thought it was rhetorical. Michelle, who you mentioned, brings it up. Mia talks about it with a straight face, and Davis talks about it with a straight face. And most of them contextualize that question going back years when there were only 200,000 people who were in prison. Now there are millions of people in prison. So, Molly, if you can answer that, it'll be great. Can we abolish the prison system?
Yes, we can. And we absolutely can. I mean, I think that abolition, prison industrial complex abolition is an important political framework to use for a lot of reasons. I think one, when we focus on abolition as like a common sense, doable, practical thing that we can do, we also start to see all of the problems that we just talked about the prison system, all of the violences in and outside of prisons, everything. We start to see how it's actually designed and what it's designed for, right? Like we start to see that it's actually not broken, right? But it's designed exactly as it works. It works perfectly fine, right? But we also, when we focus on abolition, we can also see all of these different ways that we can fight this thing together, right? Whether that's focusing on food or housing, right? Or education or prisoners' rights inside and outside of prisons. And I think when we flesh out, it's important for us to flesh out the connection imprisonment, right? Surveillance and imprisonment. OPD is pushing forward a proposal to get a bunch of drones to use here in Oakland, right? So the connections of militarization and how militarization is used throughout all sectors of the prison industrial complex versus when that's in our schools versus our actual streets, right? Et cetera, et cetera. And we also need to make, obviously, the connections to the economic and the social conditions that we live in, right? And, I think that a huge part of understanding abolition and what we need to get better at is thinking of it not just as a vision, right, but also as a strategy, right? So something that we can do in our campaigns currently in the here and now. I think it's also important to not just focus on the prison aspect, right? So prison obviously is a huge part of imagining a world without imprisonment and policing and premature death, right? But we also need to focus on all of these overlapping interests of industry and government that use imprisonment, policing, and surveillance, right? And so when we do that, we can focus on what we need to dismantle, right? We need to dismantle these systems that are attacking us, that are setting us up for lives of premature death, right? We also need to change the way that we relate to each other, right? So like what you brought up of like how that fear influences our willingness to actually unite and organize together right now, right? And we also need to build the actual world that we want, right? So we need to not call the cops, right? But we also need to support each other in holding each other accountable, right? To actually confront the times that we do, that we are in conflict with each other, and when we do harm each other, right? Because that is real, right? We're living in very violent conditions. We learn that violence is how you survive, and so we often treat each other like shit, and that's not okay, right? And every time we hurt ourselves or each other or our communities, we're making our collective effort